I never imagined the day would come when I'd be standing outside the house I built myself, looking at the door slammed in my face by my own son, feeling my heart tighten and tears burn in my eyes as I tried to understand how everything had reached that point. How that boy I cradled in my arms, whom I fed with my own milk, whom I protected from all the dangers of the world, was now standing there in front of me, saying I was no longer welcome in my own house, that I no longer had a place. In that home I built brick by brick, sweat by sweat, tear by tear, during so many years of hard work and sacrifice. And the worst part wasn't even the humiliation of standing there on the sidewalk while the neighbors looked through their windows and whispered among themselves. It wasn't even the physical pain of carrying those two heavy suitcases under the scorching midday sun, but rather the absurd pain of knowing this was happening because of her, that woman who had entered my son's life like a sneaky snake and had completely poisoned his mind against me, transforming my sweet and caring boy into someone I barely recognized, into someone capable of looking me in the eyes and saying with frightening coldness that I had 48 hours to get my things out of there, and that if I didn't leave willingly, he would call the police. And I stood there frozen trying to process those words because it simply made no sense. How could he expel me from my own house, from the house I had bought? With my own money, with the sweat of my work of over 20 years as a nurse, working double and triple shifts to be able to give him a decent life after his father abandoned us when he was only 3 years old, leaving me alone with a small child and a pile of bills to pay. But I never gave up, never let him lack anything. Never let him feel the weight of that paternal absence, because I was both mother and father at the same time. I was there at all the school presentations, at all the soccer games, at all the nights when he woke up with nightmares, at all the important moments of his life. And now he was there treating me as if I were an intruder, as if I were someone who had no right to be there. And all because of that woman who had appeared in his life just a year ago and had already managed to completely distance him from me. And if you're following this story and have gone through something similar, or know someone who's going through a situation like this with a child who changed completely after starting a relationship, leave it here in the comments, because I need to know I'm not alone in this pain. That other mothers have also felt this tightness in their chest from seeing a child drift away due to another person's influence. It all started exactly 1 year and 2 months ago, when Lucas came home with that silly smile on his face and told me he had met someone special. And I was happy for him because after all he was already 27 years old, and I always wanted to see my son happy and fulfilled. I had always dreamed of the day he would find a nice woman who would make him smile like that. And at first, I even tried to like Bruna. I really tried to open my heart and receive her well in our home. I prepared special dinners, made a point of asking about her life, about her dreams. Tried to create a connection because I thought that if she was important to my son, then she had to be important to me too. But in the first few weeks, I started to notice strange signs that made me uncomfortable. Small things that perhaps other people wouldn't even notice, but that for a mother who has known her son since he was born were impossible to ignore, like, for example, the way she made a point of interrupting whenever I was telling some story about Lucas's childhood, or how she would discreetly roll her eyes when I suggested some outing or activity to do together, or how she always had a ready excuse not to participate in the Sunday lunches that had been a tradition in our family for years. And the worst of all was seeing how Lucas was gradually changing, how he was becoming more distant, colder, more impatient with me. He started complaining about things that had never been a problem before, saying I was too controlling, that I interfered too much in his life, that I needed to give him more space to breathe. And I tried to explain that it wasn't control, it was care. It was a mother's love. It was legitimate concern for his well-being, but he didn't want to listen anymore. It seemed like there was a blockage. As if her words had more weight than mine, and I started to feel increasingly excluded from my own son's life. Increasingly like a stranger inside my own house. Things were gradually but steadily getting worse, like a silent disease that slowly consumes without you noticing until suddenly everything is destroyed and there's no turning back. And Bruna planted seeds of discord, so subtly that by the time I realized it was already too late. She started making poisonous comments disguised as concern, saying things like, "Wow, Lucas, your mother looks very tired. I wonder if she's working too hard. Maybe she needs professional help, or honey, have you noticed how your mother gets possessive when other people are around? That's not very healthy for you." And I saw Lucas absorbing those ideas like a sponge, starting to look at me with different eyes, starting to question my attitudes that had always been normal, that had always been simply expressions of my mother's love. Like, for example, when I asked if he had eaten lunch well, or if he needed anything, or if he wanted me to wash his clothes. Absolutely normal things that any mother does for a child. But that suddenly started being interpreted as invasion of privacy, as suffocation, as unhealthy emotional dependence, and I found myself having to justify things I never had to justify before. Apologizing for showing love, for worrying, for wanting to be present in my son's life, and the feeling was horrible. It was as if I were being judged and condemned for being a mother, for loving too much, for caring too much, and every time I tried to talk to Lucas about it, he immediately became defensive, saying I was being paranoid, that I was making things up, that Bruna had never done anything wrong, and that the problem was all in my head, in my inability to accept that he was growing up and building his own life. And that broke my heart, because I always knew that one day he would grow up and follow his own path. I always wanted that for him. I always wanted him to be independent and happy, but it wasn't about that. It was about the way she was manipulating him against me, about how she was distorting reality and making him believe I was the problem, when in fact I only wanted what was best for him. After 6 months of dating, Bruna started spending more and more time at our house until she practically moved in. And I didn't object, because after all the house was big enough, and I thought that maybe by living more closely, I would be able to better understand that woman and maybe even build a closer relationship with her. But exactly the opposite happened. The more she was there, the more I felt displaced, because she started acting as if she owned the house. She started changing things without consulting me, reorganizing the kitchen cabinets, saying that way was more practical, moving furniture around, claiming that the house's energy needed to flow better. And when I politely protested, saying I preferred things the way they were, she gave that little corner smile and spoke loud enough for Lucas to hear. Wow, what excessive attachment to material things. That's not healthy. Honey, have you noticed how your mother has difficulty with changes? And Lucas, who before would have been on my side, now agreed with her, saying I was being too rigid, that a simple change in the arrangement of furniture wasn't the end of the world. And I found myself swallowing my tears in pride, because I didn't want to create more conflict, didn't want to give her more ammunition to use against me. So I let it go. I gave in. I stayed silent. But each time I did that, a piece of me died a little. A piece of my dignity, my self-esteem, my right to be respected in my own house was being gradually eroded. And if you're enjoying this story, if you want to know how all this ended and what was the call that completely changed the game, then leave that like down there, because it really helps the channel grow and reach other people who need to hear stories like this. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any news story. We post here every week. And comment down below telling if you've been through something similar. If you know someone who's going through a situation like this. Because your experience can help other people who are suffering in silence, thinking they're alone in this pain. The last straw came one Saturday morning when I woke up early, as I always do, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. And when I got there I found Bruna, already awake, looking at her phone. And she looked at me with a strange expression and said we needed to talk, that there were some things she needed to make clear. And I felt a tightness in my chest, but remained calm and asked what it was. And she then said without beating around the bush that she and Lucas were planning to get married soon, and that they thought it would be better if I started thinking about looking for another place to live. That it would be healthier for everyone if I had my own space, and they could have privacy to build their life as a couple. And I was so shocked that, for a moment, I couldn't even react. I stood there looking at that woman who had the audacity to tell me to leave my own house. The house I had bought and paid for with my own money, with my own work, and when I finally managed to find my voice, I told her that was absurd, that she had no right to ask me something like that. That was my house, and I wasn't going to leave because of her. And she shrugged with a frightening calmness and said she had already talked to Lucas about it, and he agreed with her. That he was just waiting for the right moment to talk to me, but since the subject had come up, then it was time for me to face reality. And at that moment, Lucas came down the stairs and I ran to him hoping he would deny all that, hoping he would say it was a lie, that he would never agree to something like that. But to my horror, he averted his gaze and said quietly that Bruna was right. That it was time for me to think about having my own space. That I deserved to live my own life without worrying about him all the time. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, couldn't believe that was my son talking, the son I raised alone, whom I worked like crazy to give a decent life, to pay for private school, to give everything good and the best. I tried to argue, tried to make him see the madness of what he was proposing, tried to remind him of everything I had done for him over the years. Of all the sacrifices, of all the nights I stayed awake, taking care of him when he was sick. Of all the dreams I left behind to fulfill his dreams. But he didn't want to listen. He was as if hypnotized. Totally under that woman's control. And Bruna stood there beside him with that satisfied smile on her lips, as if she were watching a theater play, as if all that was very entertaining for her, and I realized at that moment that I had lost my son, that she had gotten what she wanted. Had managed to turn him completely against me, and the pain I felt was so intense that I thought I was going to faint right there. But I held myself together, took a deep breath, and told him it was okay. That, if that's what he wanted, then I would respect his decision. But that he needed to understand that that house was mine by right, that I wasn't simply going to abandon everything I had built. And it was then that he said that phrase that was engraved in my heart like hot iron. He said that, actually, the house was in his name. That I had put it in his name 5 years ago when he turned 22, because I wanted him to have something guaranteed in case something happened to me, and I had completely forgotten about that. Had erased from memory that gesture of love that was now being used against me in the worst possible way. And Bruna knew that. Of course she knew. She had researched, had informed herself, had planned everything just right. And now she was there with the upper hand ready to expel me from my own house. And there was nothing I could do because legally the house was indeed in his name. The days that followed were the hardest of my entire life, including even the horrible period after Lucas's father abandoned us. Because at least, at that time, I had my son by my side. I had someone to fight for. I had a reason to continue. But now, I had lost exactly that. had lost the only thing that really mattered to me. And I found myself packing my bags with trembling hands, choosing which objects to take and which to leave behind. Each thing I picked up came loaded with memories. That vase I bought on the trip I took with Lucas to the beach when he was 10. That painting he gave me as a Mother's Day gift when he was 15 and worked doing odd jobs at the supermarket to save money. That blanket my mother had made before she died and that had been with me for over 30 years. And each object I put in the box seemed to tear out a piece of my soul. And Lucas barely appeared in the room while I was packing my things. He stayed hidden in the living room or went out with Bruna, so he wouldn't have to face what he was doing to me. And in the rare times we crossed paths, in the hallways he would avert his gaze and move on as if I were invisible. And that hurt more than anything he could have said or done. That silent contempt, that indifference, as if I meant nothing, as if all those years were worth nothing. I managed to rent a tiny little room at the back of an acquaintance's house, a space so small that barely fit a bed and a wardrobe. But it was what I could afford with a nurse's salary, because I had to maintain basic expenses for food and transportation, and not much was left over. And the move from an entire house to that cramped little room was overwhelming. I cried every night, looking at those empty walls and wondering how my life had reached that point. How everything had fallen apart so quickly, and worst of all was Lucas's absolute silence. He didn't call, didn't send messages, didn't ask if I was okay, if I needed anything. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist for him, and I tried a few times to get in touch, sent messages asking how he was, saying I missed him. That I was always available if he wanted to talk, but the responses when they came were dry and monosyllabic. And I'm fine here, and okay there, nothing that indicated any kind of affection or concern, and I slowly withered away in that little room, lost weight, lost the sparkle in my eyes, lost the will to live. And my colleagues at the hospital started to notice something was wrong. They asked if I was okay and I said yes, that everything was great, but inside I was shattered. I was dying a little bit each day that passed, without hearing from my son. 3 long and painful months of almost total silence passed. 3 months when I woke up every day hoping to receive a call from him. A message, any sign that he still cared even a little bit, but nothing came, and I went to work on autopilot. Took care of patients, with the professionalism as always, but without the passion I always had for my profession. Because it seemed that an essential part of me had been ripped out, and I was just surviving. Just fulfilling the basic obligations of life, without really being present. And in some moments of desperation I thought about giving up on everything. Thought it wasn't worth continuing to suffer like that. But then I remembered my mother. How she had been strong all her life. How she had faced all difficulties with her head held high, and had never let herself be completely defeated. And that gave me strength to continue one more day, and then another, and another, always with the hope that someday things would get better. That someday Lucas would wake up from that trance and go back to being the son I knew. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 3 months and 11 days after I had left home, I was at the hospital doing my afternoon shift when my cell phone rang with an unknown number. And normally, I don't answer calls from numbers I don't know because it's usually advertising or scam. But something made me answer that day. Some intuition, some premonition. And when I put the phone to my ear and said hello, I heard a female voice on the other end that wasn't Bruna's voice, but was clearly calling about Lucas, and she introduced herself as Amanda and said she was Bruna's younger sister. And my heart raced, because I didn't know Bruna had a sister and I had no idea what that call could mean. If it was another setup, another way to hurt me, but Amanda soon clarified that she was calling behind her sister's back. That she had gotten my number through a cousin of Lucas, who had been her classmate at school. And she said she needed to tell me some things about Bruna that I had the right to know, things that would explain a lot about her behavior and about what she was really doing with my son. And I felt a chill down my spine, but at the same time a spark of hope. Because finally something was happening. Finally someone was approaching with information that could change the game. Amanda then told me that Bruna had a history, a pattern of behavior she had been repeating for years. Since adolescence, she did the same thing. She approached men who had something she wanted, usually assets, properties, some kind of financial stability. And she won these men over, involved them emotionally until they became completely dependent on her, and then she began a meticulous process of distancing them from their families, especially from their mothers, because according to Amanda, Bruna had a serious problem with maternal figures. She had been abandoned by her own mother when she was 12 and since then harbored a visceral hatred for mothers in general, especially for mothers who were close to their children, who had a healthy and loving relationship with them that made her angry, envious. And she couldn't stand to see other people having what she didn't have, so she destroyed those relationships. She got between mother and child and did everything to create an abyss between them, and Amanda said it had been like that with the other 3 boyfriends Bruna had had before Lucas. In all cases, she had managed to distance the guys from their families, and into cases had even gotten her hands on properties and money before ending the relationship and moving on to the next victim. And Amanda was telling me this because she couldn't stand to see her sister doing that to other people anymore. Couldn't stand being a silent accomplice to all those manipulations. And she said she was absolutely certain that Bruna didn't really love Lucas. That she was only with him for the house, for stability. And that, as soon as she managed to definitively transfer the property to her name or managed to marry under the regime of total community of property, she would probably find a way to end the relationship and keep everything. And hearing that was at the same time a relief and a despair. Relief because it confirmed all my suspicions, everything I had felt but couldn't prove, and despair because I didn't know how to use that information. Didn't know how to make Lucas believe me when he was so completely under her control. Amanda then sent me some screenshots of conversations Bruna had had with her months ago. Conversations where she spoke openly about her plans to get rid of me, to make Lucas expel me from home, and there was even a message where she said literally, "I'm almost there. A few more months, and that annoying old woman will be out of my life forever. Then I'll have the whole house to myself and can do whatever I want." And seeing that written so raw, so cruel, made me feel a rage I had never felt before, but at the same time gave me hope, because finally I had proof. Had something concrete I could show Lucas, something he wouldn't be able to deny or distort, and Amanda told me she had more material. Had photos and conversations that proved the other scams Bruna had pulled before, and she offered to help me expose all of this, but warned me that we needed to be very careful because Bruna was extremely manipulative and dangerous when she felt cornered. And I thanked Amanda from the bottom of my heart, cried on the phone with her, and for the first time in 3 months, I felt I had a real chance to get my son back, to save him from that trap he had fallen into. I spent the next few days carefully planning how to approach Lucas, how to show him that evidence without it seeming like an attack, without him completely closing himself off and refusing to listen, and Amanda was fundamental in this process. She helped me organize all the material chronologically, showing Bruna's pattern of behavior over the years. And she also told me details about previous relationships, names of people who had been harmed, amounts that an antimori. Discovered the more I was horrified by the person who was living with my son, by the predator who had entered our life disguised as a loving girlfriend. And I knew I had to act fast because Amanda told me that Bruna was pressuring Lucas to set the wedding date soon, that she wanted to get married before he changed his mind or discovered anything. So time was against me, and I couldn't waste this opportunity that had appeared. After much thought, I decided that the best approach would be through a letter, a long and detailed letter where I would put all my feelings, all my mother's love, all the good memories we had shared over the years, but also all the evidence I had received from Amanda, printed and attached to the letter, so he could see with his own eyes who really was the woman he was planning to marry. And I spent an entire night writing that letter, cried while I wrote, relived each important moment of his life, each achievement, each challenge we overcame together, each proof of love I gave over 27 years, and at the end I put all the evidence. The conversations, the photos, the testimonies of Bruna's previous victims, all very well organized and explained. And I finished the letter saying that regardless of the decision he made, I would always be his mother and would always be there with open arms waiting for him, that my love was unconditional and eternal, and that I just wanted him to know the truth so he could make a conscious choice about his future. And when I finished writing, it was already dawn and I was exhausted, but at the same time felt a strange peace, as if finally I was doing something proactive instead of just suffering passively. I sent the letter registered to make sure he would receive it, and spent the next 3 days in a state of absolute anxiety, unable to sleep properly, unable to concentrate on anything, imagining all his possible reactions, all the scenarios that could happen. And on the 4th day after I sent the letter, my phone rang, and when I looked at the screen and saw Lucas's name there, my heart almost stopped. My hands started trembling so much, I almost dropped the phone, and when I finally managed to answer, I heard his voice on the other end, and he was clearly emotional, clearly shaken, and he started apologizing, asking for forgiveness for everything he had done, saying he had been a blind idiot, that he had let that woman manipulate him completely, that he couldn't believe how stupid he had been, how badly he had treated his own mother, the only person who had always been on his side, who had always fought for him, and he was crying, sobbing on the phone, and I was crying too. It was a cry of relief, of gratitude, of love, and I told him everything was okay, that I forgave everything, that what mattered was that now he had opened his eyes and could start over. And he told me he had confronted Bruna with all the evidence, that she first tried to deny, but after he showed the conversations and screenshots, she had no way to lie anymore and ended up admitting everything, saying he didn't understand anything about life and that he would regret letting her go, and he had sent her away right then, had said he never wanted to see her face again, and now he was alone in the house and realized how empty that house was without me. How unfair he had been, how much he had thrown away because of a person who never really cared about him. Lucas then begged me to come back home, said that it had always been and always would be my house, that he would transfer the property back to my name the next day, that he wanted to make things right, that he wanted to make up for all the suffering he had caused me. And I told him he didn't need to transfer anything, that it wasn't about the house. It had never been about that. It was about respect, about love, about family, and that I would come back, yes, but only if he promised that from then on we would be a real family again, that we would talk about everything, that we wouldn't let anyone plant discord between us anymore. And he promised promised with such sincerity that I felt in my heart that this time it was true. That he had really learned his lesson, and at that moment I knew everything would be okay. That we would be able to rebuild our relationship, that horrible ordeal we went through would in the end make us stronger. More united, because now we knew each other's value, knew how precious it was to have a real family. When I returned home a few days later, it was like coming home after a war. Everything was the same, but at the same time everything was different. And Lucas was waiting for me at the door with red eyes from crying so much, and as soon as he saw me he ran and hugged me so tight. I thought I would suffocate, and he kept repeating, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry," nonstop. And I stroked his hair like I did when he was a child and said everything was okay, everything was forgiven, and we stood there, embracing for a time that seemed like an eternity. And when we finally entered the house, I saw he had prepared everything, had cleaned the entire house, had put flowers in all the rooms, had prepared my favorite dish for dinner, and at that moment I had absolute certainty that I had gotten my son back, that he had returned to me. And the following months were of reconstruction, of reconnection, of healing. We talked a lot about everything, about the mistakes he had made, about how manipulation works, about how important it is to always be alert to the signs, and he did therapy to process everything that had happened, to understand how he had been so easily manipulated. And I also did therapy to process all the pain and rejection I had felt. And little by little we went back to being the family we always were. Even better than before, because now there was a new awareness, a deeper appreciation for each other. And if you were moved by this story, if you felt along with me this entire journey of pain and redemption, leave that like down there, because it really makes all the difference for the channel's growth. Subscribe so you don't miss any new story we post here every week. And especially comment down below telling what you thought of this story. If you've been through something similar, or if you know someone who's going through a situation like this of manipulation within the family, because sharing these experiences helps other people identify the signs and act before it's too late. Today, 2 years after that terrible episode, Lucas and I have a better relationship than ever. He's more mature, more aware, more grateful. And I learned to give more space when necessary, but also to speak up when something isn't right. To not swallow things anymore for fear of causing conflict. And we created healthy boundaries that protect our relationship from negative external influences. And every time he meets someone new now, he's much more careful, much more attentive to the signs, to the red flags. And he always introduces me to the person and always values my opinion. Not because he's dependent on me, but because he understands that a mother knows her child in a way nobody else does. And that this perspective has value. And as for Bruna, she tried to come back a few times. Sent messages, showed up at the house door, tried to win Lucas back with promises that she had changed. But he was firm, didn't give openings, blocked her from everything, and eventually she gave up and moved on to the next victim, because people like that don't change. People like that will always look for someone to manipulate, someone to use, and we can only hope that the next person has the luck to discover the truth before it's too late. And Amanda, that wonderful sister who had the courage to call me and tell me everything, became a dear friend. We talk regularly. She completely broke off with Bruna after that episode because she couldn't stand being an accomplice to her wickedness anymore. And she says that helping me was one of the best things she's ever done in her life. That she finally managed to sleep peacefully knowing she prevented another family from being destroyed because of her sister. This story taught me many important things about relationships, about family, about manipulation, about forgiveness. And the first lesson is that professional manipulators like Bruna really exist, and they are much more common than we imagine. They're out there disguised as normal people, as loving boyfriends, as loyal friends. But behind the mask, there's a calculating and dangerous person who only thinks about their own benefit. And the second lesson is that even intelligent and well-intentioned people can fall into these traps. It's not a matter of being stupid or naive. It's a matter of being vulnerable at the wrong time and meeting someone who knows exactly how to exploit that vulnerability. And the third lesson is that true love, family love, is stronger than any manipulation. It can take time. It can hurt a lot in the process. But in the end, truth always prevails and love always finds a way to win. And the fourth lesson is that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let resentment poison your heart. It means choosing to move forward without carrying the weight of resentment, but without failing to learn from the experience. And the fifth lesson is that communication is absolutely essential in any relationship. If Lucas and I had talked more openly from the beginning, if he had really listened to me when I tried to warn him about Bruna, maybe a lot of pain could have been avoided. But sometimes we need to go through pain to learn, to mature, to value what really matters. To all the mothers who are watching this now, and who are perhaps going through something similar, who are seeing a child drift away due to another person's influence, whether boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, whoever it is, I want to say don't give up, don't lose hope, keep loving. Keep trying to maintain contact, even if the response is cold or non-existent. Because that thread of connection may be the only thing that will bring your child back when the truth finally comes to light. And if possible, seek proof, seek information, talk to people who know the person who's manipulating your child. Because information is power, and sometimes that's all we need to open the eyes of those we love. But do it carefully, with strategy, because confronting directly can have the opposite effect and make the person close themselves off even more. And always remember that you're not alone. There are thousands of mothers going through the same thing, feeling the same pain, and sharing these experiences. Whether here in the comments, whether in support groups, whether with close friends, can make all the difference in not going crazy in this process. And for the children who are watching, especially the children who are perhaps starting to realize something is wrong in the relationship they're in, who are starting to notice the signs of manipulation, of distancing from family, I beg you to stop and reflect. To talk honestly with the people who have always been by your side, to not let pride or stubbornness prevent you from seeing the truth. Because sometimes we're so emotionally involved that we can't see the obvious, can't perceive we're being used, that we're being manipulated. And there's nothing wrong with admitting you were wrong, with asking for help, with going back on bad decisions. In fact, that's a sign of maturity and intelligence, recognizing the mistake and having the courage to correct it. And your mothers, your fathers, your families will always be there with open arms waiting for you, because family love is that. It's unconditional. It's eternal. It's endless forgiveness. Looking back now, I can see how that terrible experience transformed me in several ways, made me stronger but also more humble, more cautious, but also more grateful, more aware of dangers but also more appreciative of blessings. And the greatest blessing of all continues to be my son. That boy I raised alone and who, despite having gotten lost, for a while ended up finding his way back home. Back to me. And today when we sit down to have dinner together, when we watch a movie cuddled on the couch, when we simply talk about the day, I feel an immense gratitude for having this second chance. For being able to live these moments I thought I had lost forever. And Lucas says the same thing, says he almost lost the most important thing in his life because of an illusion. because of a well-told lie, and that now he values every minute he spends with me. Every conversation, every laugh, every simple but precious moment of family togetherness. So if this story touched your heart in some way, if you identified with some aspect of it, if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video, send it to that person, because sometimes a story like this can be exactly what someone needs to open their eyes, to have the courage to act, to not give up, and don't forget to leave that cool like down there. To subscribe to the channel, activating the bell, because we post new stories every week. Real stories of real people facing difficult situations but finding strength to overcome. And comment down below. Tell your story, your experience. Because we're a community here. We support each other. We help each other. And your story may be exactly what another person needs to read today, to not feel alone in the struggle. And I read all the comments, every single one, and I'm very happy when I see people sharing their experiences, their victories, their overcoming, because that's what keeps us strong, knowing we're not alone, that other people understand our pain and our struggle. And to finish, I want to leave a message of hope. No matter how dark the situation seems now, no matter how impossible reconciliation seems, no matter how much time has passed, it's never too late for true love to win. It's never too late for truth to come to light. It's never too late to rebuild what was broken. It can take time. It can require patience. It can require many tears and much pain in the process. But if the love is true, if the intention is pure, if the persistence is constant, eventually things work out. Eventually justice prevails. Eventually good wins over evil, and I'm living proof of that. I who was completely destroyed 2 years ago, I who saw no way out, I who thought I had lost my son forever. Today I'm here whole, happy, at peace, with my son by my side, stronger than ever. And if I could do it, you can too. Anyone can. You just have to not give up. Just have to keep fighting. Just have to keep loving even when it seems there's no more reason to love. Because in the end, love always finds a way to win, always prevails over everything. And that's the most beautiful and most powerful truth that exists in this world. So never give up on those you love. Never stop fighting for your family. Because there's nothing more valuable than that. There's nothing more worthwhile than preserving the bonds that connect us to the people who really matter, to the people who are our safe harbor, our reason for living, our family.